Hello, this is eCountry Lifestyles, and I'm John McMahon, and I'm going to talk to you today about wild foods. The spring greens, the wild greens, because spring for wild foods is basically greens time. And lamb's quarters are very common. They grow all over the world, and no doubt you have some, so this is one that you could certainly try. The other wild green, one more wild green I want to mention is poke. Poke I kind of keep off in a class by itself because poke root is poisonous. And so when you collect poke, you want to be sure you, for one thing, are collecting poke. You don't want to collect the roots. But if you collect it in the proper way, it's a very good green. Excellent green. Probably the equal of asparagus. In fact, it's actually the most flavorful of the wild greens, frankly. I actually like dandelions better, but then that's because dandelions are so easy, probably. But poke, you collect poke, you need to be able to identify it, and of course I'm purposely not trying to give you identification on these things because I think anybody who's going to use wild greens needs to make a little effort to identify things, and you probably need a field guide of plants to do this and take enough time that you feel confident that what you're collecting is what you want to collect, because you're the person who's responsible for your own well-being, and it isn't that this is hard to do, it's just that it's something you need to do personally, and you'd be better off not to rely on somebody else. But poke is again a pretty ubiquitous plant. You're likely to have some close to where you live. It happens to come up a lot here on my place. There are some types of soil in this county where there doesn't seem to be much poke, but certainly I doubt that there's a county in the Midwest that doesn't have a lot of poke somewhere. It has, in the South they collect a lot of this green called poke salad, and I've even seen it in the supermarkets in the South. And so it isn't something that's really freaky to eat. It is definitely eaten, but you have to be careful with it. There are other plants that are commonly eaten that have poisonous parts. Rhubarb is a good example, and so are tomatoes and potatoes. So this is nothing unusual, but you do have to know what you're collecting and don't bring in the roots. You usually collect poke when it's about somewhere between 6 inches tall and a foot, and you just break them off the top of the ground and bring them in. They're something like, look something like asparagus, only they have some leaves coming out on the top of where asparagus crop doesn't. But you collect them somewhat the same, bring them in, boil them. I like to boil them 10 minutes, throw the water away, and then cook it again. Again, this is just a precaution. Probably not one you even need to take, but the fact of the matter is poke has a lot of flavor. And you won't have a flavorless green by any means if you do this. It will still probably be the most flavorful green you eat, so you probably can discard this early water and give yourself that extra insurance and still have something that has an enormous amount of flavor, and I suspect quite a bit of nutrition. But they're good. It's good any way that you eat greens. You know, different people eat greens in different ways. Some people don't put any seasoning in them. Some put all kinds of seasoning in them. Some put a little seasoning in them. So you just fix these wild greens in the same way that you like them yourself. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to find out that you can add 4 new greens to your list of consumptions and never have to plant a thing. You know, you can just start in harvesting them every year. When we first did this, the first one of them, well, we were eating dandelions, but the first one that I really collected a lot of was wintercress. And the truth of the matter is I can virtually not find any wintercress growing on my place anymore. We've eaten it all. It's gone. If I want wintercress, I have to go somewhere else to get it. So these are good. They're good greens. This is not something freaky or wild or crazy. In fact, they're mostly so good that if they didn't come up for nothing, you probably would plant them. I think they're basically the equal of kale and collards. If you're not a greens eater, you aren't going to like them. But if you like kale, collards, mustard, then you will like these 4 greens. That I feel sure of. Okay, well, that's so much for the green season in the spring. The other thing that comes up in the spring is mushrooms. And the only mushroom I would really advise you to use is the morel. There are 4 different species of morels, and I'm not going to make any attempt to differentiate them here at this time, but once again I would advise you to look at a guide and be sure you're picking morels. This you definitely should do. I suppose it might be somewhat comforting to know that the morels come up in the spring, and there isn't anything that I can think of offhand that looks anything like them that's poisonous, but I still would take this as a recommendation to just eat what you think might be a morel. I purposely left the meadow mushrooms off this list. In the fall, that's a good mushroom, but they look superficially like another mushroom that comes up as probably the most poisonous mushroom in this area, so I just didn't put them on the list. But I don't think you'd run into that at all with morels, but once again, I would certainly advise you to be able to know for sure you have a morel, and because people are biological individuals, it's always possible that morels won't agree with you very well. So you ought to eat a little bit sparingly of them to start with, but they are a very fine mushroom, and anybody who's familiar with mushrooms knows how much trouble people go to get morels. Probably anywhere in the Midwest, somewhere close to you, morels are coming up in the spring. So I would certainly consider looking for them if you like mushrooms, and one of the very good wild mushrooms. The next things that come up are the fruits. I guess summer in the wild foods area is fruit time. And the first one that we use a little bit of is the mulberry. The mulberry makes very good muffins. Kids seem to like mulberries, and adults don't seem to care much for them raw. I think the reason is because they're so sweet. I've noticed that my children growing up liked mulberries, and as they got to be adults, they don't eat them so much anymore. I think that the kid likes the mulberry, the child likes the mulberry because it's a very sweet fruit. Birds like mulberries. I started to have some mulberry trees on my place because I realized that once the mulberries bloom, the birds leave the other fruits, which here is mainly the strawberry at that time of year, and they leave the strawberry and go to mulberries. So the best way to keep the birds out of your strawberries is to have some mulberries. But the mulberry makes a good muffin, and it's a good raw fruit. It's just basically sweet, though, is the thing. And in a muffin, you really can't differentiate the mulberry muffin much from blueberry muffin. They taste about alike. The other 2 summer fruits that come up wild and are pretty widespread through this area are the raspberries and the blackberries. Most all areas have some black raspberries, and some of the areas have some red raspberries too. And these are, of course, just as good in the wild state as they are in the tame state, so they're certainly worth looking for as the summer progresses. Blackberries pretty much grow everywhere through the Midwest, and some of the plantings are very, very fine, very big fruits. Others are little fruits and great big thorns. Not surprising, because these things are all seedling plantings, and they're just whatever they happen to be. But all of these are useful in all the same ways that the tame berries are useful, and equally as good. And there certainly are a lot of people who gather these, and if you have never gathered them, you might enjoy gathering them a lot and find that you really look forward to them coming each season.